Today, we're unpacking a conflict that started, escalated, and totally finished in the exact amount of time it takes to watch a single sitcom episode. We're talking about the Anglo-Zanzibar War. 38 minutes. Now that number isn't just some bizarre historical trivia answer for your next pub quiz. It actually represents a brutal, hyper-efficient masterclass in 19th century gunboat diplomacy. So let's break down exactly how an entire war goes down before your morning coffee even gets cold. The scramble for Zanzibar. How an empire became a protectorate. To understand how an entire war could be fought so quickly, we have to look back at the decades of imperial maneuvering that slowly boxed Zanzibar into a corner. By the 1880s, the scramble for Africa was in full swing. In 1858, Zanzibar and Oman had formally separated. Then, by 1873, Britain was threatening naval blockades to force a ban on slave exports. But the real turning point hit in 1890. Into the Heligoland-Zanzibar Treaty. This was basically a massive geopolitical trade between Britain and Germany. Britain handed over a tiny North Sea island to the Germans, and in return, Germany agreed to recognize a formal British protectorate over Zanzibar. But crucially, the British slipped in a clause saying any future Zanzibari Sultan required explicit British approval to take the throne. It was a masterstroke of realpolitik that essentially turned the Sultan into a figurehead and set the stage for disaster. A sudden power vacuum, the death of Sultan Hamad. Fast forward to 11:40 a.m. on August 25, 1896. The pro-British Sultan Hamad suddenly dies, which immediately sparks rumors that he was poisoned. This kicks off a massive succession crisis. You had Hamad, who played nice with British commercial interests. And then you had Prince Khalid. Khalid was a fierce traditionalist, totally against creeping European interference. Sensing his window, Khalid bypassed the British entirely and just moved right into the main wooden palace to declare himself the new Sultan. By the evening of August 25th, Khalid had mobilized a force of roughly 3,000 armed supporters. We're talking palace guards, defecting local soldiers, irregulars, armed slaves. He barricaded himself in and, here's the wild part, aimed his antiquated cannons directly at the British naval vessels sitting right there in the harbor. Pointing old bronze cannons at modern warships definitely sets the tone for what happens next. The ultimatum, the ticking clock. The British diplomatic response was uncompromising. Consul Basil Cave fired off an urgent telegram to London, basically asking for permission to bombard the commercial capital. The very next day, August 26th, London handed the British commanders a chilling blank check. They were authorized to adopt whatever measures they considered necessary to fix the problem. Armed with that authorization, Cave issued a final ultimatum. Khalid had until 9 a.m. on August 27th to lower his flag and surrender, or the Royal Navy would open fire. Exactly 1 hour before that deadline, Khalid sent a defiant response. He essentially said, "We have no intention of hauling down our flag, and we do not believe you would open fire on us." He fully called what he thought was a British bluff. A massive military mismatch. Sledgehammer versus wooden yacht. Before we hit that 9 a.m. deadline, let's just pause and look at the absolute absurdity of the forces about to clash. The British didn't just have more guns. They brought a heavy-duty industrial sledgehammer to a knife fight. You've got 150 Royal Marines and 900 highly disciplined local soldiers going up against Khalid's thrown-together militia. But the real story is out on the water. You have heavily armored British cruisers packing high-explosive artillery, going up against wooden barricades and literally 17th century bronze cannons. And Zanzibar's only real naval defense was the HHS Glasgow. Built back in 1878, it was a luxurious wooden yacht designed to loosely mimic a British frigate. It cost an absolute fortune and featured a dining saloon and a water closet. But its armament was basically just obsolete 9-pounder cannons and a single Gatling gun. It had absolutely zero capability to withstand modern explosive artillery. The 38-minute war. August 27, 1896. So, the crucial point arrives. The clock strikes 9 a.m., the ultimatum expires, and the Sultan's red flag is still flying. At precisely 9:02 a.m., the British unleash a devastating point-blank barrage. 3 gunboats open fire simultaneously. Within minutes, high-explosive shells completely dismount Khalid's antique artillery and set the entire wooden palace ablaze. Out in the harbor, the HHS Glasgow actually tried to fight back, futilely firing its 9-pounders at the armored British flagship, the HMS St. George. The St. George instantly retaliated with its massive 9.2-inch ship-killing guns, tearing a hole right through the wooden yacht below the waterline. The luxurious ship sank straight to the harbor floor, with its crew needing to be rescued by British launches. Back on land, realizing the utter futility of his defense as over 500 explosive shells rained down, Calley just abandoned the fight. He slipped out a rear exit, leaving his irregular forces completely trapped inside the burning rubble of the collapsing palace. At 09:40 a.m., the Sultan's flag was finally shot away from the roof. A general ceasefire was ordered, and the dust began to settle on the shortest war in recorded history. But the human cost was staggeringly lopsided. Roughly 500 Zanzibari defenders, mostly the irregular civilians and slaves trapped in the wooden buildings, were dead or wounded. Conversely, the British suffered exactly one casualty. A single petty officer on the gunboat HMS Thrush was wounded, though he later fully recovered. But Khalid wasn't captured. In a tense diplomatic standoff, he actually managed to use a legal loophole to slip right through British fingers. He escaped to the nearby German consulate. Once there, the Germans invoked an Anglo-German extradition treaty, granting him political asylum. Khalid basically just waited for high tide on October 2nd, stepped directly from the consulate's garden onto a German naval boat, and fled into comfortable exile in modern-day Tanzania without ever technically touching Zanzibari soil again. With Khalid gone, this swift, hyper-violent intervention yielded immediate administrative control for the British. They installed a highly compliant proxy sultan named Hamoud bin Mohammed and slapped harsh, punitive reparations of 300,000 rupees on the local populace. They literally made them pay for the ammunition used to bomb them. By 1897, the British forced through the formal abolition of the legal status of slavery, completely restructuring the labor economy. And physically, the surviving House of Wonders Palace was simply repurposed into the bureaucratic headquarters for the British Colonial Secretariat. So what's the true legacy of absolute imperial efficiency? We usually hear about the 38-minute war as just a quirky piece of historical trivia, but it leaves us with a lingering thought about the brutal irony of 19th century gunboat diplomacy. A prince gets to live out his days in internationally protected exile, while 500 of his supporters pay the ultimate price for his 38-minute rebellion. It's definitely something to think about the next time this comes up at Trivia Night.
What the Fact? Follow for more.